After her wealthy ex-husband sends her a wedding invitation to spite her, Naomi Ellis finds unexpected love with his biggest business rival. But as she reclaims her power, she uncovers a web of fraud, murder, and family secrets that will change everything, especially when she decides to get the perfect revenge. But before we continue with this captivating story, make sure to subscribe for more thrilling tales and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Naomi Ellis sat at her kitchen table, staring at the cream-colored envelope that had just arrived in her mail. Her hands trembled as she recognized the return address. It was from Jonathan Sterling, her ex-husband. She knew exactly what it was before she even opened it. The wedding invitation she'd been dreading. The nerve of that man, she whispered, taking a sip of her morning coffee to steady herself. The invitation was exactly what she expected. Expensive. Paper gold lettering announcing the wedding of Jonathan Sterling to Chloe Bennett, a 25-year-old socialite who was constantly in the society pages. Naomi was 45, and the age difference between Jonathan's new fiancée and herself wasn't lost on her. That was exactly why he'd sent it. The phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. It was her sister Marie. "Did you get it?" Marie asked without even saying hello. "Just opened it," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside her. "He actually had the nerve to send it." "That man is pure evil," Marie said, "sending his ex-wife an invitation to his wedding to that child he's marrying. He's doing it just to hurt you." Naomi ran her fingers over the expensive paper. "Of course he is. He wants to show off how well he's doing without me, how he's traded up for a younger model. After everything you did for him," Marie continued. 15 years of marriage, supporting him when he was nothing but a struggling businessman with big dreams. And the minute he makes it big, he decides you're not good enough anymore." Naomi closed her eyes, remembering those early days. She'd been a successful marketing executive when she met Jonathan. She'd used her connections to help him build his tech company from the ground up. She'd worked late nights beside him, attended endless business dinners, helped him polish his image and presentations. And then, once success came, he'd changed. "You know what the worst part is?" Naomi said, getting up to pour more coffee. "He expects me to either not show up and look like I'm hiding, or come alone and look pathetic. Either way, he wins." "Then don't give him what he expects," Marie said firmly. "You're Naomi Ellis. You're beautiful, successful, and stronger than he ever gave you credit for." Just then, Naomi's cell phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Adrian Cole, Jonathan's biggest business rival. They'd met at a charity gala last month and had kept in touch. Adrian had been nothing but respectful and kind, everything Jonathan wasn't. "Marie, I need to call you back," Naomi said suddenly. "I think I just got an idea." She hung up and looked at Adrian's message. He was asking if she'd like to have dinner with him that evening. A slow smile spread across her face as a plan began to form in her mind. That night, at one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, Naomi sat across from Adrian Cole. He was handsome in a distinguished way, with gray at his temples and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Unlike Jonathan, who had become cold and calculating with success, Adrian had maintained his humanity despite his billions. "So he actually sent you a wedding invitation?" Adrian asked, shaking his head in disbelief after Naomi told him about it. "That's low, even for Jonathan. He wants to show off," Naomi said, taking a sip of wine. "Show me what I lost. How well he's doing without me. How he's moved on to someone younger, someone he thinks better fits his image now." Adrian studied her face carefully. "And what are you going to do about it?" Naomi met his gaze. "That depends. How would you like to be my date to a wedding?" Adrian's eyes lit up with understanding, and a slow smile spread across his face. Jonathan would hate that. His ex-wife showing up with his biggest business rival? It would drive him crazy. "Exactly," Naomi said. "But I don't want to just show up to spite him. I want to show him exactly what he threw away. I want to remind him that I'm not just the woman who helped build his success. I'm the woman who can stand on her own without him. And I would be honored to help you deliver that message," Adrian said, raising his wine glass in a toast. "To perfect revenge." Over the next few weeks, Naomi and Adrian spent more and more time together. What started as a plan for revenge began to turn into something more. Adrian listened when she talked about her dreams of starting her own consulting firm. He respected her intelligence and valued her opinions, and unlike Jonathan, he wasn't threatened by her strength. "You know," Adrian said one evening as they walked through Central Park, I've always admired how you handled the divorce. You never badmouthed him publicly, never tried to take him for everything he had. You just held your head high and moved forward." Naomi smiled. "My mother always said dignity is the best revenge. But I have to admit, showing up at his wedding with you might not be the most dignified move. Sometimes dignity needs a little help," Adrian chuckled. "Besides, we're not doing anything wrong. We're just two people who enjoy each other's company, attending a wedding we were invited to." As the wedding day approached, Naomi found herself thinking less about getting back at Jonathan and more about her growing feelings for Adrian. He was everything Jonathan used to be before success changed him: kind, supportive, and genuine. And he was everything Jonathan never was: secure enough in himself to celebrate her strengths rather than feel threatened by them. The night before the wedding, Adrian came to Naomi's apartment with takeout from her favorite Chinese restaurant. "Are you sure you want to do this tomorrow?" he asked as they sat on her couch. "We don't have to go if you don't want to." Naomi reached for his hand. "I need to go, not just to show Jonathan that he didn't break me, but to finally close that chapter of my life, and I'm glad you'll be there with me." Adrian squeezed her hand. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." As Naomi went to bed that night, she looked at the wedding invitation one last time. Tomorrow would be about more than revenge. It would be about showing Jonathan and herself that sometimes the best things in life come after what we think are our worst moments. Sometimes, when one door closes, another one opens to something even better than we could have imagined. And tomorrow, she would walk into that wedding not as Jonathan Sterling's ex-wife, but as Naomi Ellis, a strong, successful woman who had found someone who truly appreciated her worth. The perfect revenge wasn't about hurting Jonathan. It was about showing him exactly what he had lost and how much better off she was without him. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, almost as if nature itself was conspiring to make Jonathan Sterling's big day flawless. But across town in Chloe Bennett's luxury penthouse apartment, things were far from perfect. "I don't understand why you're so worried about your ex-wife coming," Chloe said, watching her soon-to-be husband pace back and forth. She was sitting at her vanity, having her hair and makeup done by a team of stylists. "You're the one who invited her." Jonathan loosened his bow tie, already feeling suffocated. "I just heard she's bringing Adrian Cole as her date." "Adrian Cole?" Chloe's eyes widened. "Your biggest competitor? The one who's been trying to buy out your company?" "That's the one," Jonathan muttered, pulling out his phone to check his stock prices again. They'd been falling ever since rumors of Adrian's latest business move started circulating. "She's doing this on purpose. She knows exactly what she's doing." Meanwhile, at Naomi's apartment, a very different scene was unfolding. She stood in front of her full-length mirror, smoothing down her dress, a stunning deep blue designer gown that hugged her curves perfectly. "You look absolutely gorgeous," Marie said, helping her sister with her jewelry. "Jonathan's going to eat his heart out when he sees you." "That's not why I'm doing this," Naomi replied, although she couldn't help but smile. The dress had been a gift from Adrian, who had insisted on taking her shopping at the most exclusive boutiques in New York. "Oh, really?" Marie raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you doing this?" Naomi paused, thinking about the past few weeks with Adrian. "Because for the first time since my divorce, I feel like myself again. Adrian, he sees me, the real me, not just as someone's wife or ex-wife, but as my own person." The doorbell rang, and Marie went to answer it. It was Adrian, looking handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. When he saw Naomi, his face lit up with genuine admiration. "You look stunning," he said, walking over to kiss her cheek. "Absolutely stunning." "You don't clean up so bad yourself," Naomi replied, feeling butterflies in her stomach that had nothing to do with the upcoming wedding. "Before we go," Adrian said, pulling out a small box, "I have something for you." Inside was a beautiful sapphire necklace that matched her dress perfectly. "Adrian, this is too much," Naomi protested. "Nothing is too much for you," he said, helping her put it on. "Besides, every queen needs her crown jewels." Marie watched the interaction with a knowing smile. "You two better get going. You don't want to be late for the social event of the season." As they rode to the church in Adrian's luxury car, Naomi noticed he seemed preoccupied. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Adrian took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you before we get there. Something about Jonathan's company." "What about it?" "I've been looking into his finances. The company isn't doing as well as he wants everyone to believe. He's been cooking the books, moving money around to hide the losses. That's why he's rushing this wedding to Chloe. Her family's money could save him. Naomi sat back, stunned. How do you know this? Because he tried to sell me a stake in his company last month. The numbers didn't add up, so I had my team investigate. We found irregularities going back months. Adrian turned to look at her. I didn't tell you earlier because I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it. Does Chloe know? Naomi asked. I doubt it, and I'm sure her family hasn't done their due diligence. They're too impressed by Jonathan's charm and reputation. Naomi felt a mix of emotions: anger at Jonathan's deception, concern for Chloe despite everything, and gratitude for Adrian's honesty. What are you going to do? That depends, Adrian said carefully. The SEC is already investigating. It's only a matter of time before it all comes out. But if you want me to stay quiet today, I will. This is your moment, not mine. Naomi reached for his hand. No more secrets. That's what destroyed my marriage to Jonathan. All his lies and deceptions. If you know something, I want to know too. Adrian squeezed her hand. That's one of the things I love about you. Your integrity. The word love hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly but both feeling its weight. Before they could discuss it further, the car pulled up to the church. Photographers lined the entrance, snapping pictures of arriving guests. When Adrian helped Naomi out of the car, the cameras went into a frenzy. They made quite a picture. Adrian Cole, the billionaire businessman, with Jonathan Sterling's ex-wife on his arm. Inside the church, they could feel all eyes on them. Whispers followed them as they made their way to their seats. Naomi held her head high, channeling all, the dignity and grace she possessed. From the front of the church, Jonathan watched their entrance, his face growing darker by the second. Next to him, his best man whispered something, but Jonathan wasn't listening. All he could see was Naomi looking more beautiful than ever, with his worst enemy at her side. In the bridal suite, Chloe was getting her final touches done when her father burst in, waving his phone. Have you seen this? He demanded, showing her a news alert. Sterling Technologies' stock is in freefall. There are rumors of an SEC investigation. Chloe stared at the phone, then at her reflection in the mirror. She thought about Jonathan's strange behavior lately, his insistence on rushing the wedding, his obsession with his ex-wife. For the first time, she wondered if she really knew the man she was about to marry. Back in the main church, Adrian leaned close to Naomi. Are you ready for this? Naomi looked around at the crowd, at Jonathan's thunderous expression, at the chaos that was about to unfold. You know what? I really am. The wedding march began to play, but this was only the beginning. As the doors opened for the bride's entrance, no one in the church could have predicted how this day would end. Least of all Jonathan Sterling, who was about to learn that karma sometimes arrives wearing a blue dress and carrying a lot of incriminating financial documents. The wedding march played through the church speakers, but Chloe Bennett didn't move from the bridal suite. She sat in her designer wedding dress, staring at her phone as more news alerts kept coming in about Sterling Technologies. Daddy, what should I do? She asked her father, who was pacing the room, making frantic phone calls to his financial advisors. Stay right here, Mr. Bennett said firmly. I'm going to have a word with your future husband. In the main church, the guests were getting restless. The music had played twice now, and there was no sign of the bride. Jonathan kept checking his phone, his face growing paler by the minute. The whispers among the guests grew louder. Something's wrong, Adrian whispered to Naomi. Look at Jonathan's face. Naomi watched her ex-husband carefully. She knew that look. It was the same expression he'd had when their marriage started falling apart. The look of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. Suddenly, Mr. Bennett stormed down the aisle, heading straight for Jonathan. You lying snake, he shouted, not caring about the hundreds of guests watching. You were going to use my daughter's trust fund to save your failing company. The church erupted in gasps and murmurs. Phones came out as people started recording the scene. Jonathan tried to quiet Mr. Bennett, but it was too late. Did you really think we wouldn't find out? Mr. Bennett continued. The SEC investigation, the cooked books, the millions in hidden debt. Jonathan grabbed Mr. Bennett's arm. Let's discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss. Mr. Bennett yanked his arm away. The wedding is off, and my lawyers will be in touch about the money you've already borrowed from us. As if on cue, Chloe appeared at the back of the church, still in her wedding dress, but with tears streaming down her face. How could you? She cried out to Jonathan. Was any of it real, or was I just a convenient solution to your money problems? The photographers who had been waiting outside were now pushing their way into the church, cameras flashing. Jonathan looked around desperately, trying to find a way to salvage the situation. That's when his eyes landed on Naomi and Adrian. "You," he pointed at them. "This is your doing. You planned this." Adrian stood up calmly. "Actually, Jonathan, you did this to yourself. The SEC has been watching you for months. Today's events just pushed up their timeline a bit. And what about you?" Jonathan turned on Naomi. "Showing up here with him, was this all part of your revenge plan?" Naomi rose gracefully from her seat. "I came here because you invited me, Jonathan. You wanted to show me how well you were doing without me, how you'd upgraded to someone younger, someone you thought was better suited to your image. But the truth is, you haven't changed at all. You're still the same selfish, insecure man who threw away our marriage because you couldn't handle having a strong woman by your side." The church was dead silent now, everyone hanging on every word. Even the photographers had stopped clicking their cameras. "I supported you when you had nothing," Naomi continued. "I believed in you when no one else did. And how did you repay me? By trading me in like I was last year's model the minute you thought you'd made it big. Well, look at you now, Jonathan. All your lies are finally catching up to you." Chloe walked down the aisle, but instead of going to Jonathan, she stopped next to Naomi. "I should have listened when people told me how you treated your first wife," she said to Jonathan. "I thought they were just jealous of our happiness, but they were right about you all along." Jonathan's face turned red with rage. "This is ridiculous. Adrian Cole put you all up to this. He's been trying to destroy me for years." "No one had to destroy you, Jonathan," Adrian said calmly. "You did that all by yourself. I just made sure the truth came out before you could drag another innocent woman down with you." As if to punctuate Adrian's words, several men in dark suits entered the church, showing their badges. "Jonathan Sterling," one of them called out. "I'm Agent Roberts with the SEC. We need to ask you some questions about Sterling Technologies' financial records." The chaos that followed was like something out of a movie. Jonathan tried to make a run for it, but was stopped by security. Guests were scrambling to get out their phones and record everything. Reporters were shoving microphones in everyone's faces. In the middle of it all, Adrian turned to Naomi. "I think we should get out of here." "Good idea," she agreed, taking his arm. As they walked out of the church together, they could hear Jonathan's angry shouts behind them, demanding to speak to his lawyer. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright, and a warm breeze rustled the decorative flowers that had been set up for the wedding that never happened. "Well," Adrian said as they reached his car, "that wasn't exactly how I planned to tell you this, but I love you, Naomi Ellis." Naomi looked up at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You know what? I love you too, even though I just helped ruin your ex-husband's wedding. Especially because of that," she laughed, then grew serious. "You did the right thing, exposing his fraud before he could hurt more people. That's one of the things I love about you, your integrity." Adrian pulled her close. "What do you say we get out of here? There's a little Italian restaurant I know in the Hamptons. Very private, very romantic." "Perfect," Naomi said. "But first, there's something I need to do." She walked over to where Chloe was standing with her father, looking lost and embarrassed. "I know this isn't how you imagined your wedding day," Naomi said gently. "But trust me, finding out the truth now is better than finding out years down the road after he's taken everything from you. You deserve better than Jonathan Sterling." Chloe wiped away a tear. "Thank you for everything." As Naomi walked back to Adrian's car, she felt lighter than she had in years. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure justice is served and then moving on to something better. And as Adrian held the car door open for her, Naomi knew that's exactly what she had found. Something much, much better than revenge. The morning after the wedding disaster, Naomi woke up to her phone buzzing non-stop. News of Jonathan's arrest had made headlines everywhere. Tech mogul arrested at his own wedding. Sterling Technologies CEO facing fraud charges. Billionaire's wedding turns into federal investigation. "Turn it off," Adrian mumbled, reaching over to take the phone from her hand. They were at his beach house in the Hamptons, where they'd escaped to after leaving the chaos at the church. "I can't," Naomi said, sitting up in bed. "Marie has called 12 times, and look at this. Jonathan's mother is giving interviews, blaming me for everything." Adrian propped himself up on his elbow. "Margaret Sterling never did like you. Probably because you were the only one who stood up to her. She's saying I orchestrated the whole thing with you to destroy Jonathan." Naomi showed him the article. "That I'm a bitter ex-wife who couldn't stand to see him happy. We both know that's not true," Adrian said, taking her hand. the SEC, had been investigating Jonathan for months. All we did was make sure the truth came out before he could drag Chloe and her family into his mess. Just then, Naomi's phone rang again. This time it was her lawyer, David Chen. "Naomi," David said when she answered, "we need to talk. Jonathan's lawyers are threatening to sue you and Adrian for corporate espionage and defamation. They're claiming you used insider knowledge from your marriage to help Adrian sabotage Sterling Technologies." "That's ridiculous," Naomi exclaimed. "I haven't had anything to do with that company since the divorce." "I know, but they're desperate. Jonathan's facing serious charges, and they're looking for anyone else to blame. They're also trying to freeze Adrian's recent acquisition attempts, claiming it was all part of a conspiracy." After hanging up, Naomi turned to Adrian with worry in her eyes. "This is getting ugly. Maybe we should have waited to expose him." Adrian shook his head. "No, he was about to commit fraud on an even bigger scale by using Chloe's family money to cover up his crimes. We did the right thing." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Adrian's assistant, looking concerned. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Ellis, I'm sorry to disturb you, but you need to see this." She handed them a tablet with a live news feed. On the screen, Margaret Sterling was giving a press conference outside the family's mansion. "My son is the victim of a vindictive ex-wife and her new lover," she was saying. "Naomi Ellis never got over Jonathan choosing someone younger and more suitable. She seduced Adrian Cole, Jonathan's biggest competitor, and together they orchestrated this witch hunt to destroy my son's reputation and his company." "That witch," Naomi muttered, but Adrian was already on the phone with his PR team. "Get me a press conference set up for this afternoon," he ordered, "and call our lawyers. It's time to show the Sterlings what real evidence looks like." Later that day, at Adrian's office in Manhattan, Naomi sat with a team of lawyers reviewing documents. "Look at this," one of them said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Jonathan started moving money around right after your divorce. He was using your settlement money to cover up losses. Which means," Adrian added, "he was committing fraud even back then." "Naomi, did you ever sign any financial documents during your marriage?" Naomi thought back. "He always handled the business side, but yes, sometimes he'd have me sign things. He said it was just formalities, corporate paperwork." The lawyers exchanged looks. "We need to get copies of everything you signed. If Jonathan used your signature without proper disclosure, that's another federal charge." As they prepared for the press conference, Adrian pulled Naomi aside. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once we go public with everything, there's no going back. The media circus will get even worse." Naomi straightened his tie, a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "I spent years letting Jonathan make me feel small, like I wasn't good enough. I'm done hiding." The press conference was held in the grand ballroom of Adrian's corporate headquarters. Reporters filled every seat, cameras flashing as Naomi and Adrian took the stage together. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian began, "we're here to address the allegations made by the Sterling family. But rather than deal in accusations and emotional appeals, we're going to deal in facts." He proceeded to lay out a detailed timeline of Jonathan's financial fraud, complete with documentation. When he finished, Naomi stepped up to the microphone. "I was married to Jonathan Sterling for 15 years, she said, her voice strong and clear. "During that time, I watched him build his company from nothing. I supported him, believed in him, and yes, I signed documents he asked me to sign. What I didn't know was that he was using my trust to commit fraud." The room was silent as she continued. "I'm not here seeking revenge. I'm here because the truth matters. Because other people, like Chloe Bennett and her family, deserve to know what kind of man Jonathan really is." After the press conference, as they were leaving through a back entrance, they ran into an unexpected visitor. Chloe. "I saw your press conference," she said, looking tired but determined. "I want to help. My father found some strange documents when he was looking into Jonathan's finances. Documents that prove he was planning to use my trust fund to cover up his losses." Adrian's lawyers quickly ushered Chloe into a private conference room, while Naomi and Adrian went up to his office. "You were amazing down there," Adrian said, pouring them both a drink. "How are you feeling?" Naomi took the glass, contemplating the question. "Honestly, I feel free. For the first time since my divorce, I feel completely free of Jonathan's influence." "Good," Adrian said, sitting beside her on the office couch, "because I've been thinking about our future." "Our future?" "Yes. How would you feel about starting your own consulting firm? I know it's been a dream of yours, and I have some connections who would love to work with you." Naomi looked at him suspiciously. Are you trying to keep me away from the scandal? Adrian laughed. No, I'm trying to support your dreams the way Jonathan never did. You're brilliant, Naomi. It's time the world saw that. Before she could respond, Adrian's assistant burst in. Turn on the news, she said urgently. Jonathan Sterling just called an emergency press conference. They turned on the office TV. Just in time to see Jonathan, looking disheveled and angry, stepping up to a podium outside the courthouse. This isn't over, he was saying, staring directly into the cameras. Naomi, Adrian, you think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. Naomi felt Adrian's hand close over hers. Let him. Threaten all he wants, he said softly. We have the truth on our side. As they watched Jonathan continue his rant on TV, Naomi realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. Jonathan's threats, his mother's accusations, the media circus, none of it mattered. She had found her strength, her voice, and most surprisingly, true love when she least expected it. The path ahead might be rocky, but for the first time in years she was excited about the future. And as she looked at Adrian, she knew she wouldn't be walking that path alone. A week after Jonathan's threatening press conference, Naomi sat in her new office space, surrounded by moving boxes. Adrian had helped her lease a beautiful corner office in one of Manhattan's most prestigious buildings for her consulting firm. The view of Central Park stretched out before her, but she couldn't enjoy it. Her eyes were fixed on her computer screen, reading an email that made her blood run cold. He's trying to take my house, she said into her phone, talking to her sister Marie. The house I got in the divorce settlement. Jonathan's lawyers are claiming that since he used fraudulent money in our divorce settlement, everything needs to be reviewed. Can he do that? Marie asked. I don't know, but that's not all. Naomi clicked through more emails. He's contacting all my potential clients, telling them I was involved in his fraud scheme. He's trying to destroy my business before it even starts. There was a knock at her office door. It was Adrian, looking concerned. I just heard, he said. Naomi gestured for him to come in as she finished her call with Marie. How bad is it? He asked, sitting down across from her desk. Bad, Naomi admitted. He's trying to take everything. Adrian, the house, my reputation, my future clients. He's even going after the money I earned before we were married, claiming it was all mixed together in our joint accounts. Adrian's face hardened. This ends now. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Get me Raymond Chen from the FBI's white-collar division. Tell him it's about Jonathan Sterling. Naomi looked at him questioningly. Adrian covered the phone's mouthpiece. Remember those documents Chloe brought us? They led to something bigger, much bigger. An hour later, they were sitting in a federal building facing FBI agent Raymond Chen. The agent spread out a series of documents on his desk. Mr. Sterling wasn't just cooking the books at his company, Agent Chen explained. He was involved in a larger conspiracy. Several tech companies, all manipulating their numbers, all covering for each other. When one needed a boost, the others would make fake investments or create ghost contracts. And Jonathan was part of this, Naomi asked. He wasn't just part of it. According to Ms. Bennett's documents, he was organizing it. The marriage to Chloe wasn't just about getting her trust fund. Her father's company was going to be their next target. As they left the FBI office, Naomi felt overwhelmed. I was married to him for 15 years, she said quietly. How did I not see any of this? Adrian led her to a nearby park bench. Because he worked hard to keep you in the dark, just like he did with everyone else. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe I was. Naive. No, Adrian said firmly. You were loyal and trusting. He's the one who betrayed that trust. He took her hand. And now he's going to pay for it. Back at Naomi's office, they found an unexpected visitor waiting. Margaret Sterling. Well, Jonathan's mother said, looking around the fancy office, I see you've landed on your feet. Tell me, how long were you planning this with Adrian? Was it before or after you destroyed my son's life? Naomi stood her ground. Margaret, I'm only going to say this once. Your son destroyed his own life. He committed fraud. He betrayed everyone who trusted him, and now he's trying to blame everyone else for his crimes. You never deserved him, Margaret spat. You were never good enough for our family. You're right, Naomi replied calmly. I deserved better. Now, please leave before I call security. After Margaret stormed out, Adrian pulled Naomi into his arms. Are you okay? Actually, I am, Naomi said, surprising herself. You know what I realized? She can't hurt me anymore. None of them can. Just then, Naomi's assistant rushed in. Ms. Ellis, you need to see this. It's all over the news. They turned on the office. TV to see Jonathan being led out of his company in handcuffs. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Tech CEO Jonathan Sterling arrested in massive financial conspiracy. The FBI moved fast, Adrian commented. Mr. Sterling, reporters were shouting. Do you have any comment about the allegations? Jonathan looked directly into the cameras. This is a witch hunt. My ex-wife and Adrian Cole orchestrated this whole thing. They're the ones who should be investigated. But his protests were drowned out by more breaking news. Other CEOs were being arrested across the city. The whole conspiracy was unraveling. Naomi's phone started ringing. It was Chloe. I just saw the news, Chloe said. The FBI agent told me my father's statement about Jonathan's plans for our company helped break the case. I wanted to thank you, Naomi. You saved my family from being dragged into this mess. After hanging up, Naomi turned to Adrian. Is it really over? The criminal case is just beginning, Adrian said. But his attempts to hurt you, yes, those are over. His lawyers have bigger problems now than trying to take your house or smear your reputation. Naomi walked to the window looking out at the city. You know what's strange? A part of me feels sorry for him. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. That's because you have a good heart. It's one of the many reasons I love you, even with all this drama. Especially with all this drama. He turned her around to face him. Which is why I want to ask you something. Move in with me. Naomi looked surprised. What? I know it's fast, but life is short. And after everything that's happened, I know one thing for certain. I don't want to waste any more time. I love you, Naomi Ellis. Move in with me. Before she could answer, her assistant interrupted again. Ms. Ellis, the FBI is on the phone. They need you to come down to their office. They found something in Jonathan's personal files that they think you should see. Naomi and Adrian exchanged looks. Just when they thought it was over, it seemed there were more surprises in store. Whatever it is, Adrian said, we'll face it together. Naomi squeezed his hand, knowing he was right. The past few weeks had taught her that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best ones. And whatever Jonathan had hidden in those files, she was strong enough to handle it. As they headed to the FBI office, Naomi thought about Adrian's question. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop letting the past hold her back and start embracing her future. A future that, despite all the drama and chaos, was looking brighter than ever. The FBI office was buzzing with activity when Naomi and Adrian arrived. Agent Chen led them to a conference room where boxes of files were spread across a large table. Ms. Ellis, Agent Chen said, picking up a particular folder. What can you tell me about Project Phoenix? Naomi frowned. I've never heard of it. Really? The agent opened the folder. Because according to these documents, you were listed as a primary consultant on this project during your marriage to Jonathan Sterling. Naomi leaned forward to look at the papers. There was her signature, clear as day, on several documents she'd never seen before. That's impossible, she said, her voice shaking. I never signed these. Adrian picked up one of the documents, studying it closely. This is forged. Look at the date. Naomi was in Europe with me at a technology conference that week. She couldn't have signed this in New York. Agent Chen nodded, making notes. That's what we suspected. Mr. Sterling appears to have been forging your signature on documents for years, Ms. Ellis. He used your credentials and reputation to legitimize several fraudulent projects. But why? Naomi asked. Why keep using my name after the divorce? Because you had something he didn't, Adrian realized. A spotless reputation in the tech industry. People trusted you. Just then, another agent rushed in with a laptop. Sir, you need to see this. We just decoded Sterling's private emails. On the screen, they saw emails between Jonathan and several board members dating back to before their divorce. One particular message caught Naomi's eye. N is getting suspicious about the overseas accounts. Time to implement Plan B. Remember, she needs to be the one to ask for the divorce. That way, no one will look too closely at the books during the settlement. Naomi felt like she couldn't breathe. He planned it, all of it. The affairs, the public humiliation. He wanted me to leave him. Adrian put his arm around her shoulders. Because if you filed for divorce, you'd want to get it over with quickly. You wouldn't want a long public battle. Which is exactly what happened, Naomi said quietly. I just wanted to get away from him. I didn't even fight for my fair share of the company. Agent Chen closed the laptop. Ms. Ellis, I'm going to be honest with you. These documents show that Mr. Sterling has been using your identity to commit fraud for years. The good news is, We can prove these signatures were forged. The bad news is, we need you to testify against him." "Testify?" Naomi looked at Adrian. "You don't have to decide right now," Agent Chen said. "But if you do testify, it would help ensure he can't hurt anyone else." As they left the FBI office, Naomi was unusually quiet. Adrian took her to their favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where they could talk privately. "What are you thinking?" he asked after they were seated. "I'm thinking about all the times I doubted myself," Naomi replied. "All the times I wondered if I wasn't smart enough, sophisticated enough, good enough for him. And now I find out it was all part of his plan. He needed to break you down," Adrian said, "to make you doubt yourself so you wouldn't question what he was doing." Their conversation was interrupted by Naomi's phone ringing. It was Margaret Sterling. "I know what you're doing," Margaret said without preamble. "The FBI just questioned me about Project Phoenix. If you testify against my son, I'll make sure everyone knows about your affair with Adrian." "What affair?" Naomi asked calmly. "Don't play innocent. I have photos of you two together from months before Jonathan's wedding." "You mean the charity gala, where there were hundreds of witnesses and photographers?" "Go ahead, Margaret, show everyone those photos. All they'll prove is that Jonathan was lying when he claimed Adrian and I conspired against him." After hanging up, Naomi looked at Adrian with a small smile. "You know what? I'm going to testify." "Are you sure?" "Yes. For years, Jonathan made me feel powerless. He used my name, my reputation, my trust. It's time to take it all back." Adrian reached across the table for her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. And about what I asked earlier, about moving in together, there's no pressure. I know this is a lot to handle right now." "Actually," Naomi said, "I've been thinking about that too." Yes, I'll move in with you. Life's too short to let fear hold us back, right?" Their moment was interrupted by breaking news on the restaurant's TV. Jonathan's face filled the screen as reporters announced he was being charged with additional counts of fraud and identity theft. "In a shocking development," the reporter said, "sources say Sterling's ex-wife, Naomi Ellis, may have been an unwitting victim of his schemes for years. Sterling allegedly forged her signature on numerous documents." Naomi turned back to Adrian. "You know what the strangest part is? A month ago, this would have devastated me. But now I just feel sorry for him." "Because you're stronger now," Adrian said. "You know who you are and what you're worth." Just then, Naomi's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Chloe. "Just saw the news. I found more documents in my father's office that might help. Can we meet?" "Speaking of worth," Adrian said, reading the message over her shoulder, "you've turned the women Jonathan tried to use against each other into allies. That's pretty amazing." As they left the restaurant, photographers who had been camping outside started snapping pictures and shouting questions. "Ms. Ellis, will you testify against your ex-husband?" "Mr. Cole, are the rumors true about a merger between your companies?" Naomi and Adrian walked past them, hand in hand, neither bothering to respond. They had more important things to focus on, like their future together, and making sure Jonathan faced justice for everything he'd done. Back in their car, Naomi looked at the city lights flickering outside her window. "You know what? For the first time in years, I'm actually excited about the future." Adrian smiled. "Even with all this chaos, especially with all this chaos, because now I know I can handle anything as long as I have the right person by my side." As they drove home, Naomi thought about how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. She'd gone from dreading her ex-husband's wedding to finding real love, from feeling powerless to reclaiming her strength. And somehow she knew the best was yet to come. Moving day at Naomi's house was interrupted by a phone call from the district attorney's office. Jonathan's trial was being moved up. Instead of 3 months, they now had 3 weeks to prepare. "They're pushing for a quick trial," Naomi told Adrian as they packed boxes in her living room. "The prosecutor thinks Jonathan might try to flee the country." "He's right," Adrian said, setting down a box of books. "I just heard from my contacts. In Switzerland, someone's been trying to move large amounts of money from hidden accounts there." Naomi sat down on a packed box, feeling overwhelmed. "I have to testify in 3 weeks. In front of Jonathan, his mother, the press, everyone." Adrian knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "And you'll be brilliant, because this time you're telling your truth." Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Chloe carrying a stack of files. "I found more," she said, walking in. "My father kept copies of everything. Look at this." She spread the papers on Naomi's coffee table. Jonathan was planning to use my family's company to hide his illegal activities. He had it all mapped out even before he met me. Naomi looked at the documents. These dates, this was right after our divorce. He started planning it the moment you left, Chloe confirmed. He needed a new way to hide his fraud, and my family's company was perfect. Old money, good reputation. No one would look too closely at the books. Adrian studied the papers. This is exactly what the prosecutors need. It shows a pattern of deliberate fraud. As they went through the documents, Naomi's sister Marie arrived with lunch for everyone. I figured you could use a break from packing, she said, then noticed their serious faces. What's wrong? The trial's been moved up, Naomi explained. 3 weeks. Marie set down the food bags. Then we better make sure you're ready. No one knows Jonathan better than you do, sis. You can do this. Later that night, after everyone had left, Naomi and Adrian sat among the half-packed boxes, sharing a bottle of wine. Are you sure you want to move in with me now? Adrian asked. With everything else going on. I've never been more sure of anything, Naomi replied. I'm done letting Jonathan control my life. Moving in with you, testifying against him. It's all part of moving forward. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Naomi met with prosecutors, reviewed documents and packed up her house. But the night before the trial, she couldn't sleep. She found herself in Adrian's home office at 3 a.m. looking at old photos from her marriage to Jonathan. Can't sleep, Adrian asked, appearing in the doorway in his pajamas. I was just thinking, Naomi said, showing him a photo from her wedding to Jonathan. Look how happy I was, how much I believed in him. Adrian sat next to her. That's not weakness, Naomi. Believing in someone you love is never wrong. He's the one who betrayed that trust. What if I fall apart on the stand tomorrow? What if I can't face him? Then you'll take a deep breath, remember who you are now, and keep going. And I'll be right there in that courtroom, supporting you. The next morning, the courthouse was packed with reporters and spectators. Naomi wore a simple blue suit, the color of strength, Adrian had said. Jonathan was already there when she arrived, sitting with his lawyers. He looked different, thinner, older, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. When he saw her, he tried to catch her eye, but Naomi looked straight ahead. Margaret Sterling was there too, sitting directly behind her son, glaring at Naomi. But this time, her glare held no power. The prosecutor called Naomi to the stand. As she walked to the witness box, she could feel everyone's eyes on her. Ms. Ellis, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about Project Phoenix. Naomi took a deep breath and looked at Adrian, who gave her an encouraging nod. Project Phoenix was supposedly a legitimate business venture, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. But I never signed those documents. I never approved those transactions. Jonathan forged my signature, used my reputation to hide his illegal activities. And why would he do that? Because people trusted me. In the tech world, my name meant something. I had spent years building honest relationships, while Jonathan, he was using those relationships to commit fraud. Jonathan's lawyer stood up. Objection, speculation. Sustained, the judge said. The prosecutor held up a document. Ms. Ellis, where were you on March 15th, 2024? I was in Paris at the European Technology Summit. There are hundreds of witnesses, photos and videos proving I was there. Yet this document, dated March 15th, 2024, bears your signature. A signature supposedly witnessed by a notary in New York. That's correct, I couldn't have signed it. I was on another continent. As the questioning continued, Naomi felt stronger with each answer. She detailed how Jonathan had manipulated their divorce, used her name without her knowledge, and planned to do the same to Chloe's family. During cross-examination, Jonathan's lawyer tried to suggest that Naomi had known about the fraud all along, that she was only testifying now out of revenge. Is it true that you're now in a relationship with Adrian Cole, Mr. Sterling's biggest competitor? Yes, I am, Naomi said firmly. But I met Adrian months after discovering Jonathan's fraud. My testimony today isn't about revenge, it's about the truth. The truth, the lawyer scoffed. Isn't it convenient that you discovered all this fraud right around the time Mr. Sterling was planning to remarry? Naomi looked directly at Jonathan for the first time. No. What's convenient is how my ex-husband planned our divorce to hide his crimes. What's convenient is how he chose Chloe's family as his next victims. The truth isn't convenient. It's necessary. From her seat in the gallery, Chloe nodded slightly, tears in her eyes. After Naomi stepped down, the prosecutor called their next witness, a handwriting expert who could prove the forgeries. but Naomi barely heard it. She sat next to Adrian, who squeezed her hand. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she replied softly. "We did it. All of us. You, Chloe, Marie, everyone who stood by me and helped expose the truth." Outside the courthouse that evening, reporters swarmed around them. "Ms. Ellis, how does it feel to testify against your ex-husband?" Naomi paused, then turned to face the cameras. "It feels like freedom. Freedom from lies, from manipulation, from doubt. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't standing up to your enemies. It's standing up for yourself." As they drove home to their home now, Naomi felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Tomorrow, Chloe would testify. Then the forensic accountants. The trial would go on, but Naomi's part was done. "What do you want to do tonight?" Adrian asked. Naomi smiled. "Let's unpack some boxes. Make our home together. Start our future." Because that's what this had all been about, really. Not revenge, not getting even, but finding the strength to build something new, something real, something true. The second week of the trial brought more shocking revelations. Chloe took the stand, her testimony even more damaging than Naomi's. "Jonathan didn't just target my family's money," she testified, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "He had a whole network of fake companies set up to receive the funds. He was planning to bankrupt us and blame it on bad investments." From her seat beside Adrian, Naomi watched Jonathan's face grow paler with each word. His expensive suit couldn't hide how much weight he'd lost in custody, and his usual arrogant smirk was replaced by a look of desperate fear. Margaret Sterling wasn't in court today. She'd been caught trying to contact one of the jurors and was banned from the proceedings. The press was having a field day with that story. During a break in testimony, Naomi checked her phone and found dozens of messages. News had leaked about a potential movie deal based on the scandal. 3 publishers wanted her to write a book. But the message that caught her eye was from one of her new consulting clients. "Just closed the deal," the text read. "Your strategy was perfect. When can we discuss the next phase?" Adrian noticed her smile. "Good news. My first big client." "Success," Naomi said. "Turns out there are plenty of companies who want to work with someone known for exposing fraud." Instead of committing it, their conversation was interrupted by commotion in the hallway. Jonathan's lead lawyer was walking out, briefcase in hand. "What's going on?" Naomi asked one of the prosecutors. "Sterling's lawyer just quit," the prosecutor said with a satisfied smile. Apparently, Jonathan was lying to his own defense team. They found out this morning and withdrew from the case. When court resumed, Jonathan sat alone at the defense table with only his junior lawyer, who looked completely overwhelmed. The prosecutor called their star witness, Jonathan's former CFO, who had agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. "Mr. Sterling didn't just forge his ex-wife's signature," the CFO testified. "He had a whole system in place. Every time we needed to hide illegal transactions, we used shell companies registered in Mrs. Ellis's name. She was our unwitting shield." "And why Mrs. Ellis specifically?" the prosecutor asked. "Because of her reputation. She was respected in the industry. No one would question a company associated with Naomi Ellis." During cross-examination, Jonathan's inexperienced lawyer barely asked any questions. It was clear to everyone that the case was falling apart. That evening, as Naomi and Adrian were leaving the courthouse, they found a surprise visitor waiting by their car. Jonathan's youngest brother, Thomas. "Can we talk?" he asked Naomi. "There's something you need to know." Over dinner, at a quiet restaurant, Thomas revealed even more family secrets. "Jonathan wasn't just stealing from his company," Thomas explained. "He was stealing from our mother too. That's why she's been so desperate to protect him. If he goes down, she loses everything." "But Margaret's always been wealthy," Naomi said, confused. Thomas shook his head. "It's all smoke and mirrors. Jonathan convinced her to invest everything in his schemes years ago. The mansion, the cars, her whole lifestyle. It's all built on fraud. That's why she hates you so much. You're not just threatening Jonathan, you're threatening her whole world. She blames me for exposing the truth instead of blaming Jonathan for committing the crimes," Naomi realized. "Exactly. But here's what you don't know. I found evidence that Jonathan was planning to betray her too. Once he married Chloe and got control of her family's money, he was going to cut Mother off. Completely." Adrian leaned forward. "Do you have proof of this?" Thomas pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's here. Emails, bank transfers, the whole plan. I wanted you to have it before—" He hesitated. "Before what?" Naomi asked. "Mother's planning something. I don't know what, but she's desperate. And desperate people do desperate things. As if on cue, Naomi's phone buzzed with a news alert. Margaret Sterling had called a press conference for the next morning. She's going to try to discredit you publicly, Thomas warned. She's been gathering dirt on you and Adrian for weeks. She doesn't care if the evidence against Jonathan is true. She just wants to destroy your credibility before the jury reaches her verdict. Adrian took Naomi's hand. Let her try, we have nothing to hide. Maybe not, Thomas said, but Mother's very good at making nothing look like something. She's had years of practice helping Jonathan hide his crimes. Back at their apartment, Naomi and Adrian reviewed the files Thomas had given them. They revealed not just Jonathan's betrayal of his mother, but years of family manipulation and lies. Look at this, Adrian said, pointing to an email. He was gaslighting his own mother, making her think she was losing her memory when she questioned where her money was going. Just like he did to me, Naomi said quietly, making me doubt myself, my judgment, my worth. Their discussion was interrupted by a call from Chloe. Turn on the news, she said urgently. Jonathan just tried to flee the country. They caught him at the airport with fake passports and $2 million in cash. The late-night news showed footage of Jonathan being led back to jail in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully maintained image completely shattered. We found these in his possession, the FBI agent announced, holding up passports with Jonathan's picture but different names, along with evidence that he was planning to flee to a country with no extradition treaty. Naomi watched the footage, feeling strangely empty. This man had once been her husband, someone she had loved and trusted completely. Now he was being led away in handcuffs, revealed to the world as a criminal and a fraud. Are you okay? Adrian asked softly. You know what's strange? Naomi replied. I don't feel anything anymore. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. It's just done. Adrian pulled her close. That's called healing. You're not his victim anymore. You're not even his ex-wife. You're just Naomi, strong, successful, loved for exactly who you are. As they got ready for bed, Naomi thought about Margaret's upcoming press conference. Whatever accusations she planned to make, whatever lies she tried to spread, they couldn't hurt her anymore. The truth was already out there, and it was stronger than any lies the Sterlings could tell. Whatever happens tomorrow, she told Adrian as they lay in bed. I'm ready for it. We're ready for it, he corrected her. Remember, you're not alone anymore. Naomi snuggled closer to him, feeling safe and loved. Tomorrow would bring more drama, more revelations, more attempts to shake her strength. But for the first time, in years, she wasn't afraid. She had found her truth, her voice, and most importantly, her real happiness. The life she had thought was perfect with Jonathan now seemed like a beautiful prison. What she had now, her growing business, her supportive relationship with Adrian, her renewed confidence, this was real perfection. And no press conference, no desperate accusations, no last-minute schemes could take that away from her. The morning of Margaret Sterling's press conference dawned cold and rainy. Naomi stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear. Wear the red suit, Adrian suggested from the doorway. If we're going to face Margaret's accusations, you might as well look powerful doing it. You don't have to come, Naomi said, pulling out the suit. She's going to attack you too. Try and stop me, Adrian replied with a smile. Besides, I just got some interesting information from my investigators. Before he could elaborate, Naomi's phone rang. It was Thomas Sterling. Mother's lost her mind, he said without preamble. She's not just planning to accuse you of conspiracy. She's going to claim you and Adrian murdered her husband 20 years ago. What? Naomi nearly dropped the phone. Your father died of a heart attack before I even met Jonathan. I know, but she's desperate. She's going to claim she found evidence that you and Adrian planned everything from the beginning. Dad's death, your marriage to Jonathan, all of it. She's even forged documents to support it. Adrian took the phone. Thomas, is your mother still at the mansion? Yes, why? Keep her there as long as you can. We're coming over. As they drove through the rain to the Sterling mansion, Adrian explained what his investigators had found. Your father-in-law's death wasn't as simple as everyone thought, he said. There were irregularities in the autopsy report, questions about his medication. The case was reopened briefly 5 years ago, but someone paid to have it buried. Jonathan? Naomi asked. No, Adrian said grimly. Margaret. When they arrived at the mansion, Thomas met them at the door. She's in the study rehearsing her speech, but you should know she's not alone. She hired a crisis management team. Let me talk to her first, Naomi said. Alone. Adrian started to protest, but Naomi squeezed his hand. "Trust me, I know how to handle Margaret Sterling." The study looked exactly as Naomi remembered it. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and Margaret holding court behind the massive desk that had once belonged to her husband. "Well, well," Margaret said, looking up from her papers, "come to beg me not to destroy you." "Actually," Naomi replied calmly, "I came to show you these." She placed a folder on the desk. "Your husband's real autopsy report, the one that shows he was being poisoned, the one that has your fingerprints all over it." Margaret's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "The same place I got these." Naomi placed another folder down. "Bank records showing you've been embezzling from your own family's foundation for decades, long before Jonathan started his schemes. You're bluffing." "Am I?" Naomi sat down across from her former mother-in-law. "You taught Jonathan everything. He knows about fraud, didn't you? But he learned from the best. You've been doing this since before he was born." Margaret's carefully maintained composure cracked. "You don't understand. Charles was going to leave me for his secretary. I would have lost everything. So you killed him, then used Jonathan to build an even bigger fortune through fraud." "I did it for my children." "No," Naomi said softly. "You did it for yourself. Just like you're trying to destroy me now to save yourself." Tears began to run down Margaret's perfectly made-up face. "What do you want? Call off the press conference, confess to your crimes, and maybe, just maybe, Thomas and your other children will still visit you in prison." "Prison?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "I'm 70 years old. Should have thought of that before you committed murder." Just then, Adrian and Thomas entered the study with 2 FBI agents. "Mrs. Sterling," one of the agents said, "we need you to come with us." As the agents led Margaret away, she turned to Naomi one last time. "I underestimated you. We all did." "Yes," Naomi agreed. "You did." Back in their car, Adrian turned to Naomi. "How did you know she'd confess?" "Because I know Margaret Sterling. Her whole life has been about maintaining the perfect image. The thought of her crimes being exposed, of everyone knowing what she really is, that was worse than prison." They drove to the courthouse in silence, arriving just as the jury was returning with their verdict in Jonathan's trial. The courtroom was packed. Chloe sat with her father in the front row. Thomas and his siblings huddled together, still processing the news about their mother. And Jonathan, looking smaller than ever, sat at the defense table alone. "In the matter of the United States versus Jonathan Sterling," the jury foreman read, "on the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." As the foreman continued reading the verdicts, guilty on all counts, Naomi felt Adrian's hand slip into hers. "How do you feel?" he whispered. Naomi watched as Jonathan was led away in handcuffs, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. The wedding invitation that was meant to hurt her but instead had set her free. The man beside her who had helped her find her strength. The truth that had finally come to light. "I feel like it's finally over," she said. "Really over." Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about Margaret's arrest, about Jonathan's conviction, about what would happen to Sterling Technologies. But Naomi and Adrian walked past them all, heading toward their car and their future. They had a home to finish decorating, a business to build, and a life to live together. "You know what's funny?" Naomi said as they drove home. "Jonathan sent me that wedding invitation thinking it would be the final blow to my happiness. Instead, it was the beginning of everything good in my life." Adrian smiled. "Sometimes the things meant to break us end up making us stronger." As they pulled into their driveway, Naomi looked at the home they now shared. Through the windows, she could see the boxes they still needed to unpack, the life they were building together. "Ready to go in?" Adrian asked. Naomi looked at him. This man who had helped her find justice, who loved her strength instead of fearing it, who had shown her what real partnership meant. "Ready for anything," she replied, because she was. The Sterling's perfect facade had crumbled, revealing the rot beneath. But Naomi had built something real, something true, and that was better than perfect any day. 1 year later, Naomi stood in front of the mirror in her office, adjusting her dress before the biggest presentation of her career. Her consulting firm had grown from a single client to become one of the most respected names in corporate ethics and fraud prevention. "Ready?" Adrian asked, appearing in her doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "Almost," she replied, taking one of the cups. "Did you see the morning news?" They both knew what she was talking about. Jonathan Sterling had been sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Margaret Sterling had finally pleaded guilty to her husband's murder. The Sterling family saga was front-page news again. "Thomas called," Adrian said. "He and his siblings are selling the mansion. They're using the money to repay everyone their mother and Jonathan stole from." Naomi nodded, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 year. The Sterling empire had crumbled, but from its ashes, something better had grown. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Guess who just got engaged? He's a kindergarten teacher, the complete opposite of Jonathan." "Good for her," Naomi smiled, showing Adrian the message. "Speaking of weddings," Adrian said casually, "I've been thinking..." But before he could continue, Naomi's assistant poked her head in. "They're ready for you in the conference room." The presentation was for the Securities and Exchange Commission. They wanted Naomi's firm to develop a new fraud prevention program that would be implemented nationwide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Naomi began, standing confidently at the podium. "A year ago, I was the unwitting face of corporate fraud. Today, I'm here to help make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." As she outlined her program, Naomi could see Adrian watching proudly from the back of the room. Their relationship had only grown stronger over the past year, built on trust, respect, and genuine love. After the presentation, which was met with a standing ovation, they had lunch in their favorite Italian restaurant, the same one where they'd hidden from reporters during the trial. "You were amazing today," Adrian said, pouring her a glass of wine. "We were amazing," Naomi corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Actually," Adrian said, reaching into his pocket, "that's what I wanted to talk about this morning." He pulled out a small velvet box and got down, on one knee next to their table. The other diners gasped and turned to watch. "Naomi Ellis?" he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring. "This past year has shown me what real love looks like. It's not about control or image or power. It's about partnership, trust, and making each other stronger. Will you marry me?" Tears sparkled in Naomi's eyes as she looked at the man who had helped her find justice, who had supported her dreams, who had shown her what true love really meant. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The restaurant erupted in applause as Adrian slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her. Later that evening, they hosted a dinner party at their home to celebrate both the engagement and the success of Naomi's presentation. Marie was there, along with Thomas Sterling and his siblings, Chloe and her new fiancé, and several of their closest friends. "I'd like to make a toast," Thomas said, raising his glass, "to Naomi and Adrian. Thank you for helping us see the truth about our family and for showing us that it's never too late to start over. And to new beginnings," Chloe added, smiling at her kindergarten teacher fiancé. After their guests had left, Naomi and Adrian stood on their balcony, looking out at the city lights. The emerald ring sparkled on her finger, catching the moonlight. "Happy?" Adrian asked, wrapping his arms around her. "More than I ever thought possible," Naomi replied. "You know, when Jonathan sent me that wedding invitation, he thought he was going to break me. Instead, he set me free. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even," Adrian said. "It's about living well and finding real happiness." "Speaking of happiness," Naomi turned to face him, "I have some news of my own." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Adrian's eyes widened. "Are you?" Naomi nodded, tears of joy in her eyes. "I found out this morning. We're going to have a baby." Adrian swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed with pure joy. Inside their home, on the mantel, sat a framed wedding invitation, the one Jonathan had sent to hurt Naomi, but now it served as a reminder that sometimes life's worst moments can lead to its greatest blessings. The next morning, as they lay in bed planning their future, Naomi thought about how far she'd come. From a woman who had doubted her worth to a successful businesswoman about to marry the love of her life and start a family. From someone who had been controlled by the Sterlings to someone who had helped bring their crimes to light. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About perfect revenge," Naomi replied, snuggling closer to him. "And how it turned out to be nothing like I expected. It wasn't about hurting Jonathan or his family. It was about finding my own strength, my own happiness, my own truth. And," Adrian prompted with a smile, "and finding you," she said, kissing him softly. That was the most perfect revenge of all. Outside their window, the sun rose on a new day, full of promise and possibility. The Sterling saga was finally over, but Naomi's story her real story, was just beginning. And this time it wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was simply about love, truth, and the joy of living life on her own terms. The end.